Hello and welcome back to the Better Humans Project podcast, and I'm your host, Greg Pfeiffer. Welcome to part 4 of the Pursuit of Happiness series. We made it, the final chapter. And I want to take a moment before we dive in to acknowledge what we've built together across the series, because it has been quite a journey. In part 1, we explored the psychology of happiness, mapping what science tells us happiness actually is, the PERMA model, the happiness myths, and why genuine flourishing is built rather than found. In part 2, we stepped into something ancient and sacred, the world's great spiritual and religious traditions, and the extraordinary consensus they share about where true happiness is actually found. In part 3, we went into the laboratory, into neuroscience, neurochemistry, gut health, clinical psychiatry, and the biology of what happens when happiness breaks down and how medicine and psychology can help restore it. 3 lenses, 3 rich, complex, illuminating ways of understanding one of the most fundamental human pursuits that has ever existed. But here's the thing. As valuable as each of those lenses is, the psychological, the spiritual, the biological, none of them can tell you what happiness looks like for you, specifically, individually, and irreplaceably. Because you are not a research subject. You are not a data point or a diagnostic category or a spiritual archetype. You are a unique, unrepeatable human being with a specific history, a specific set of wounds and gifts, a specific collection of experiences that have shaped what joy feels like for you, what meaning looks and feels like for you, and what a life well lived means to you. And that is what today is about. Today, we bring it all home. We take everything we've learned across this series and we run it through the most important filter of all, your own lived experience, your own story, your own relationship with happiness in all its complexity, its beauty, its grief, and its possibility. So let's begin. Every one of us has a happiness story, a deeply personal narrative about what happiness has meant throughout our lives. When we had it, when we lost it, what we believed we needed to find it, and what we discovered along the way. For some people, happiness was abundant in childhood, a felt sense of safety, play, and belonging that formed a kind of emotional baseline, a reference point that they've spent their adult life trying to return to. For others, childhood was marked by instability, loss, or difficulty, and happiness was something that had to be earned or discovered rather than simply lived. Some people have known profound happiness and lost it. Some have glimpsed it in moments and wondered why it doesn't stay. Some have spent so long pursuing what they thought happiness was, the career, the relationship, the achievement, the status, only to arrive and find it wasn't quite what they expected. None of these stories is better or worse than the other, because all of them matter. Because your history with happiness, the experiences, the beliefs, the patterns, the losses, the discoveries, is the raw material from which your future relationship with happiness will be built. The American poet Mary Oliver asked one of the most important questions I know of. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And that question has always moved me because embedded in it is a recognition that our time is finite, that our life is singular, and what we choose to do with it, what we choose to make of it, matters enormously. Your happiness story is not finished. Whatever has come before, whatever joy you've known, and whatever you've lost, whatever you've chased, and whatever has surprised you, none of it determines what comes next. But understanding it, honestly and with compassion, gives you the clearest possible foundation for writing the next chapter. One of the great disservices our culture does to the pursuit of happiness is that it hands us a template, a picture of what a happy life is supposed to look like, and it tends to be remarkably similar across most of the Western world. The fulfilling career, the loving partnership, the beautiful home, the healthy body, the active social life, the financial security, the meaningful purpose, the inner peace. And while none of these things are bad, and in fact most of them are genuinely wonderful, the template is a problem because it assumes that happiness is universal in its form, that what makes one person flourish will make another person flourish, that the life that would light me up would light you up too. And yet the evidence, both scientific and anecdotal, says clearly otherwise. Psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky has studied what she calls person activity fit, the idea that different happiness generating activities work differently for different people depending on their personality, their values, their natural strengths, and their circumstances. An introvert and an extrovert will find very different activities energizing. A person who values deep intellectual engagement will find very different sources of meaning to someone who is energized by physical challenge or creative expression. A person whose deepest value is connection will find their happiness in very different places to someone whose deepest value is freedom or achievement or service. This is not relativism. Some things genuinely do support happiness more reliably than others, and we've explored them across this series. But it is a recognition that happiness is ultimately personal, that the life worth living, your life worth living, cannot be downloaded from someone else's blueprint. Howard Thurman, the great American philosopher and theologian, offered what I think is one of the most important pieces of wisdom ever given about the pursuit of happiness. He said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. People who have come alive, not people who have ticked the boxes, not people who have followed the template, not people who have achieved what they were supposed to achieve, people who are genuinely, fully, authentically alive in whatever way is true for them." What makes you come alive? If happiness is this important, and if its pursuit is this fundamental to human nature, why do so many of us struggle to find and sustain it? What gets in the way? The answers are as individual as happiness itself, but there are some common patterns worth naming because recognition is the beginning of change. Comparison is perhaps the most corrosive happiness thief in the modern world. Theodore Roosevelt called it the thief of joy, and the research fully supports that diagnosis. Social comparison, measuring our own life, achievements, body, relationship, or success against those of others, consistently undermines well-being. And in the age of social media, we are doing it constantly and almost always in the most unfavorable possible direction, comparing the full, unedited complexity of our inner life with the curated highlights of everyone else's. Now, the antidote to comparison is not ignorance, It is a deeply personal, clearly defined sense of what you value, what you are building, and what you consider success. When you are firmly anchored in your own values and your own direction, others people's lives become interesting rather than threatening. Perfectionism is another significant thief. The belief that happiness is conditional, that it will arrive when you're thinner, more successful, more organized, more loved, more financially secure, keeps happiness permanently in the future and permanently out of reach. So perfectionism is fear in disguise. And the antidote is not to lower standards, it is the radical, courageous decision to let the present moment count, to let this version of you in this season of life be enough to deserve happiness. Unprocessed grief and loss sit at the heart of much chronic unhappiness. Not because grief is wrong, grief is the appropriate, healthy response to losing something or someone that mattered. But when grief goes unacknowledged, unprocessed, and unexpressed, it calcifies. It becomes a kind of ambient sadness that colors everything, a background weight that quietly prevents the full experience of joy. Processing loss through conversation, therapy, ritual, creative expression, or simply the courage to feel it is not weakness. It is the necessary work of remaining open to life. Misalignment, which is the gap between your values and how you actually live, is one of the most reliably unhappy states a human being can inhabit. When what you do day after day is fundamentally out of alignment with what you actually care about, the result is a kind of quiet, persistent suffering that is difficult to name but impossible to ignore. It shows up as restlessness, as cynicism, as the sense that something important is missing, even when, by external measures, everything looks fine. And finally, disconnection from other people, from a sense of purpose, from nature, from one's own body, from the present moment. We've explored connection in almost every episode of this series, through every lens: psychological, spiritual, biological. And here, in the personal perspective, it remains the same. Loneliness is the most reliable predictor of unhappiness, and genuine connection, chosen, cultivated, tended, is one of the most reliable paths back toward it. Here is something that doesn't get said often enough. For many people, happiness requires courage, not the courage to climb mountains or make grand gestures or transform their life overnight, but the quieter, more demanding courage to let happiness in, to believe that they deserve it, to stop treating suffering as more authentic than joy, or busyness as more virtuous than peace, or self sacrifice as more noble than self care. Brene Brown, whose research on vulnerability and shame has transformed the conversation about human well being, has identified what she calls the foreboding joy phenomenon, the tendency, when we experience something deeply good, to immediately brace for its loss, to temper our happiness with anxiety about what might go wrong, to treat joy as dangerous, as something that will only make the inevitable disappointment worse. This is extraordinarily common, and it is, at its core, a self protective response rooted in the experience of loss. If I don't let myself be happy, I won't be devastated when it ends. If I don't fully invest in this relationship, it can't fully hurt me when it falls apart. If I don't allow myself to love this life, I won't grieve it as deeply when it changes. Brown's research found that the antidote to Foreboding joy is not vigilance, it is gratitude. The practice of actively, deliberately acknowledging the goodness of what is present right now without waiting for the other shoe to drop. Gratitude, she found, is the most reliable way of fully inhabiting moments of joy rather than holding them at arm's length. And beyond foreboding joy, there is the deeper question of worthiness. Many people, more than will ever admit it, carry a quiet, persistent belief that happiness is not quite for them, that other people deserve it more, that they haven't suffered enough, or achieved enough, or been good enough to have earned it, that joy is a reward rather than a birthright. This belief, wherever it came from, however long it has been carried, is one of the most important things that any of us can examine. And one of the most important things I can say to you today is this: you do not need to earn happiness. It is not a prize for the deserving. It is the natural expression of a life that is lived with presence, honesty, connection, and care. And it is available to you right now in whatever form is true for you. So, how do we put this all together? How do we take the psychological insights of part one, the spiritual wisdom of part two, the biological knowledge of part three, and the deeply personal reflections of today, and translate them into something livable, something real? So, I want to suggest a framework that I call the personal happiness blueprint, a way of distilling everything you've learned and reflected on across this series into a clear, honest, personalized map of what happiness actually looks like for you and how you intend to build more of it. A happiness blueprint has 5 elements. 1, your happiness values. Not what you think you should value, what you actually value. The things that, when present in your life, make it genuinely meaningful and alive. Connection, creativity, freedom, growth, service, adventure, beauty, wisdom. Take the time to name yours clearly and honestly. 2, your happiness practices. The specific, concrete activities, habits, and rituals that reliably elevate your mood, energy, and sense of aliveness. Your exercise routine, your creative practice, your morning quiet, your time in nature, your conversations with people who genuinely see you. These are not luxuries. These are the infrastructure of your happiness, and they need to be protected. 3, your happiness relationships. The specific people in your life who elevate you, who see you, who bring out what is best in you, and with whom you experience genuine belonging. These are the relationships to invest in most deliberately and most generously. 4, your happiness boundaries. These are the things, activities, environments, relationships, habits, content that you have identified through honest self examination as consistently draining your energy and undermining your well being. Not to be eliminated with rigidity, but to be navigated with increasing wisdom and intentionality. 5, your happiness purpose. The sense of meaning and contribution that gives your life its deepest dimension. What is it that you are here to do, to give, to become? Not in a grandiose sense, but in the quiet, honest sense of what genuinely matters to you and how your life can reflect that. Your blueprint doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be permanent. It will evolve as you do. But having it written down, reflected on, and returned to give you something that most people never have: a clear, personal, intentional answer to the question, what happiness means for you and what is a deliberate path toward it. As we come to the end of this series, I want to spend a few minutes stepping back and looking at the whole picture. Because one of the things that has moved me most in putting these 4 episodes together is how profoundly the different perspectives, psychological, spiritual, biological, and personal, illuminate and reinforce each other. The psychologist and the Buddhist monk are talking about the same thing: the importance of present moment awareness, of gratitude, of releasing the illusion that happiness lives in the next achievement or the next arrival. The neuroscientists and the Hasidic rabbi are talking about the same thing: the centrality of joy, of community, of the body's need for movement and rest and nourishment. The positive psychology researcher and the Taoist sage are talking about the same thing: the futility of striving against the current of life and the extraordinary peace that becomes available when we stop. So happiness, it turns out, is not divided by discipline or tradition or culture or century. It is one of the most consistent, most cross-culturally verified findings in all of human inquiry. What makes us flourish is remarkably consistent across all the lenses through which it has ever been examined: connection, presence, gratitude, purpose, movement, rest, service, growth, love. These are not new discoveries. They are the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of human experience, now being confirmed by some of the most rigorous science ever conducted. And they are available to every one of us, not as ideals to aspire to, but as practices to engage with imperfectly and consistently in the real, ordinary, beautiful, difficult context of our actual lives. This is the work, not the work of becoming a different person or achieving a different life or waiting for different circumstances. The work of showing up more and more fully for the life and the self you already have. Before we get to this week's challenge, I want to do something a little different. I want to speak directly to you, not as a host addressing an audience, but as a human being to another. You came to this series for a reason. Maybe you're genuinely happy and curious to understand it better. Maybe you're struggling, looking for insight, for tools, for some sense that things can be different. Maybe you're somewhere in the middle, not in crisis, but not fully alive either. Somewhere in the vast, complicated middle ground where most of us spend most of our time. Wherever you are, I want you to know this: your desire for happiness is not shallow. It is not self-indulgent, and it's not a distraction from more serious or more important things. It is one of the most fundamentally human desires that exists, and it deserves to be taken seriously by you, for you, as one of the most important projects of your life. Now, you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be consistently happy or cheerfully resilient or visibly flourishing. You are allowed to be in process. You're allowed to be finding your way. You're allowed to be, on some days, simply surviving, and to trust that surviving is enough for now and that the capacity for more will return. But I also want to gently challenge you, because one of the things I've observed across years of thinking about human flourishing is how readily we settle, how easily we accept a half-life, enough comfort to not push for more, enough distraction to not feel the absence too sharply, and enough busyness to avoid the question of whether this is really it. Now, this is not a judgment. It is an observation I make about myself as much as anyone else. And the pull towards settling is powerful. The familiar, even when it is diminished, feels safer than the uncertain terrain of change. But you are here. You've been on this journey with me across 4 episodes. You've been willing to look at the science, at the wisdom, traditions, at the biology, and now at your own story. And that willingness, that openness, that courage is itself a form of happiness. It is the beginning of something. So don't stop here. This week's challenge, the final challenge of the Pursuit of Happiness series, is to build your personal happiness blueprint. Not in one sitting, not perfectly, but honestly, carefully, and with the full weight of everything you've explored and reflected on across this series behind you. So here's how. Day 1, write your happiness values. Not a list of what you think you should value, but an honest account of what actually makes your life feel meaningful and alive. Aim for 5 to 7 values, and for each one, write a sentence about what it looks like in practice in your life. Day 2, write your happiness practices. The specific activities, habits, and rituals that reliably elevate you. Be concrete. So, not exercise, but a 40-minute run 3 times a week before the rest of the day begins. Not time with friends, but a long, uninterrupted dinner with people who know me well at least twice a month. Day 3, write your happiness relationships. Name the specific people who elevate you, and for each one, write one concrete way you'll invest in that relationship more deliberately in the coming months. Day 4, write your happiness boundaries. What are the things, the habits, the environments, the relationships, the content that you have identified as consistently undermining your well-being? Name them honestly, and for each one, write one step towards navigating it more wisely. And then on day 5, write your happiness purpose. What is it that you are here to do, to give, to become? What is the contribution that only you can make in the way that only you can make it? Now, this doesn't need to be grand, it just needs to be true. For day 6, we now put it all together. You write your personal happiness blueprint as a single coherent document, a genuine statement of what happiness means for you, how you intend to build it, and what you are committed to. Keep it somewhere visible and return to it regularly. Day 7, rest, celebrate, and remind yourself that the pursuit of happiness is not a project with a completion date. It is a practice, lifelong, evolving, and always worth continuing. How to use the companion worksheet. This worksheet is the culmination of the entire 4-part series. It is designed to bring together the insights from all 4 episodes, the psychology, the spirituality, the biology, and the deeply personal, into a single, coherent reflection that results in something genuinely useful, your own personal happiness blueprint. Take as much time as you need. It is not a worksheet to rush through. It is one to return to sit with, to update as your thinking deepens. The weekly challenge section walks you through the blueprint day by day, giving you structure and space to build it gradually and honestly. When you are finished, you will have something that very few people take the time to create. A clear, honest, personalized account of what happiness means for you and a deliberate, considered path towards more of it. Treat it with the seriousness it deserves because your happiness, your specific, individual, irreplaceable happiness, is one of the most important things in the world. 4 episodes, 4 perspectives, one extraordinary journey. So let me bring it all home one final time. In part 1, we discovered that happiness is not one thing but many: hedonic, eudaimonic, and flow, and that the most durable happiness is built, not found. That roughly 40% of our happiness is within our intentional control, and that the PERMA model, positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment, gives us a map of the terrain. In part 2, we found that the world's great wisdom traditions, despite their vast differences, converge on the same profound insight: genuine happiness is an inside job, that it arises not through accumulation, but through transformation, through gratitude, presence, love, service, and the releasing of the illusion that happiness is waiting for us somewhere else. In part 3, we learned that happiness has a biology, a neurochemistry that can support or undermine our capacity for joy, that can break down in ways that require medical and psychological support, and that is profoundly influenced by the 4 foundations that every single one of us can tend to: sleep, movement, nourishment, and connection. And today, in part 4, we brought it home. We sat with the personal, the individual, the irreplaceable, the specific. We explored the happiness thieves that get in our way. We talked about the courage that happiness sometimes requires. And we built, or began to build, a personal happiness blueprint that reflects not what happiness is supposed to look like, but what it actually looks like for you. So here is what I want to leave you with. Not as the final word, because this is not the kind of topic that has final words, but as an invitation, a direction to continue walking in. Happiness is not a destination. It is not a reward. It is not the absence of difficulty or the resolution of all problems or the arrival at some imagined version of your life where everything is finally in order. Happiness is a practice, a daily, imperfect, sometimes difficult, often surprising practice of showing up for the life you have with presence, with gratitude, with connection, with purpose, and with a willingness to be fully, honestly, courageously alive. Some days that will be easy, and some days it will be the hardest thing you do. And on the days when happiness feels very far away, remember what every tradition, every science, and every wise human being who has ever thought seriously about this has concluded. The capacity for happiness is not something you lose. It is something that is always present, sometimes obscured, sometimes buried, sometimes in need of tending, but always, always there. Tend to it. Not because life is perfect and not because you have it all figured out, but because you are worth tending to. And because the world, your world, the people in it, the lives you touch, is better when you are flourishing. So thank you. Thank you for joining me across these 4 episodes. Thank you for your willingness to look, to reflect, and to ask the questions that matter most. It has been genuinely one of the most meaningful things I've had the privilege of doing on this podcast. If this series has moved you in some way, if it has shifted something, opened something, or given you something useful to carry forward, I would love to hear about it. Leave a comment or reach out at contact@ thebetterhumansproject.com, because your story matters to me. And if someone in your life could benefit from this series, a friend who is struggling, a partner who is searching, a colleague who seems like they could do with a reminder that happiness is possible, please share it with them. And that is perhaps the most generous thing you can do. So be curious, stay humble, keep growing. This is Greg Pfeiffer, and this is the Better Humans Project podcast. It's been an honour, and let's keep building better humans together. Until next time, take care.